Today's discussion will be presented in 3 sections, since we are recording this session for a radio broadcast on Federal News Radio 1500 AM. Feel free to post questions and comments during this session, and we'll try to get them answered online. We are particularly pleased to welcome our moderator, Jason Miller, Executive Editor at Federal News Radio 1500 AM. Let me turn over the reins to Jason to begin today's discussion.
Welcome to the show today. This should be an excellent discussion on mobility and the cloud. Today, our guests are Sylvia Burns, the Interior Department's Chief Information Officer, Susie Adams, the Chief Technology Officer for Microsoft Federal. Welcome, ladies, to the panel discussion.
Thank you.
Thank you.
Well, before we get started, let me set some context to our discussion. Topic today, cloud mobility. It's kind of like the chicken or the egg argument. Did cloud beget mobility? Did mobility force issue with cloud? Hopefully our panelists can shed some light on this never-ending debate. But we do know these two concepts are intertwined. Let me give you a quick example. Don Leaf, the Deputy CIO at Labor, said earlier this year at a conference on cloud and mobility that the cloud model is very much driven by the end user. And what does the end user want to do? Reach those applications and data through their smartphones and tablet computers. National Institute of Standards and Technology also recognizes this intersection. NIST published the Cloud Computing Technology Roadmap, identifying high-priority requirements to fully adopt cloud. Now NIST is working on the next version that adds interoperability and portability. So with NIST addressing the technical issues and the Office of Management and Budget dealing with the policy angle, not just cloud first or mobile strategy, but really the convergence of these two things to improve citizen services and agency efficiency. We know that the digital government, the OMB's digital strategy is now 2 years old. It lays out 3 specific objectives: operationalizing an information-centric model to architect systems for interoperability and openness, and deliver better services at a lower cost. It seems like they're saying cloud and mobile just by another name. Other agencies, Interior, for instance, the FTC, the SEC, are all using cloud and mobility to spark innovation. Another quick example, the Federal Trade Commission, the FTC, they're modernizing their networks by leveraging cloud and establishing a mobile computing platform because so many of their employees work outside the office. So what are the considerations agencies need to take into account as they integrate cloud and mobility? And we always have to talk about security, too. That can't be ignored. Even with FedRAMP, it's a huge issue around both of these topics. And then we also have the idea of legacy systems and legacy applications. How do they deal with modernization? Many times moving those to the cloud is a cost, and the agencies are spending more money on O&M, operations, and maintenance than on modernization, and that's another concern. So, with all that context in mind, let me turn back to our guests. Sylvia Burns is the Chief Information Officer at the Department of Interior, and Susie Adams is the Chief Technology Officer at Microsoft Federal. Let me turn to Sylvia to start. Sylvia, thank you for joining us today. At Interior Department, cloud mobility, where does that stand? Give me kind of the state of mobile and cloud at your agency.
So cloud is huge at the Department of the Interior. We've done a few major initiatives. One was that we moved our 70 to 90,000 employees to a single email system that is a cloud-based email system. So we're using Google Apps for Government. And sort of records management is huge for us because of kind of all the requirements we have as a federal agency. We kind of did a simultaneous implementation of a cloud-based electronic records management solution that actually journals our email from the Google Cloud. So we have that. And we actually last year awarded this big contract. It's a $10 billion 10-year contract with 10 vendors for what we call foundational cloud hosting services, which includes infrastructure as a service, platform as a service, and software as a service. So it's a huge part of our strategy at DOI.
And that cloud piece, the contract you talked about, I know there's a lot of interest in it by a lot of vendors. Does it have a mobile piece to it too? Meaning everything, when you talk about platforms and infrastructure, there's something in there that says got to be mobile ready.
It's all based on your requirements. So if you have a mobility requirement within using the cloud, basically it just can get incorporated in. And basically, I think the most important thing you got to look at in terms of going through that process is security and risk. So
I think that's a great point, because as you kind of go down that path of cloud mobility, everyone wants to jump into that bandwagon, but if it doesn't meet the business needs, right,
Absolutely.
Then that task order that falls under there is going to be maybe not include mobility.
Yep.
All right, let me turn to Susie from Microsoft Federal. Susie, thank you for joining us today. One thing that Microsoft is obviously big into cloud, you're big into mobile. We know about the Windows tablets, Windows phones, but give us a sense, what are you seeing from your federal customers?
Well, I think I can echo what Sylvia just said. We are seeing a huge uptick, especially across the civilian, but even Department of Defense. There's been a lot of news just this past week with the DISA Cloud Broker and some pretty big changes they're making over there to improve the adoption, or I guess increase the speed of adoption of cloud and commercial cloud services inside the Department of Defense. But what we're really seeing is, if you would have asked me this 2 years ago, we would have been very, squarely focused on email. Right? It was email and basic collaboration capabilities and maybe some unified communication for the outliers there. Now I think we've really started to look at it across the cloud continuum. So we're looking at agencies moving workloads from an infrastructure as a service perspective. We call it kind of the lift and shift, take what they have in their data centers today and try to virtualize that and move that into a commercial data center on an infrastructure as a service platform like Azure, which is our infrastructure as a service platform, or Amazon Web Services. And we're also seeing, people kind of branch out into platform as a service, and they're starting to really kind of dabble in, what can platform as a service do for me? I've played with software as a service. I've seen huge benefits. I now understand the benefits from infrastructure. What can platform bring to me?
Let me ask you to define those different things, because a lot of people hear all these as a services, infrastructure, software, platform. Infrastructure as a service, give us just the 30-second definition and the platform if you can.
Well, I wish I had a chart, because the way I like to explain this is using the OSI model, because if you are an IT person, it really makes a lot of sense. What we're really doing is, if you look at maybe what Windows did for DOS, we're really just going up the stack. Right, so I can date myself. I was a DOS developer. I was one of those people that hated Windows, and the reason I hated it is because it took away control. I went up the stack, and it made me focus on my mission and how I built apps. It was much more simpler to build apps on top of it, and a lot of the pain was taken care of by the operating system. The same in the cloud when we moved to infrastructure as a service. Right, the underlying plumbing, all the bits, the bytes, the underlying physical operating system of the hosts, right, the network, have to rack and stack and cable these devices. All that's taken care of for you by the actual cloud provider. You're responsible for everything from the operating system, the guest operating system up. Right?
Interesting. Now, I remember when cloud first kicked off, as you mentioned 2 years ago, it was a lot about email and collaboration. Sylvia, let me just turn to you real quick. Are you guys starting to kind of go down that similar path as Susie described around?
Absolutely. Oh, yes, definitely. So our cloud hosting contract that I was talking to you about just a second ago is part of our strategy for data center consolidation. So it's getting into what Susie's talking about with infrastructure as a service. So our game plan is, we have over 400 data centers across the Department of the Interior. Our game plan is ultimately to get them into 6 core data centers that we have within the Department of the Interior, and then alternatively have things move to the cloud. So it's either we go to a kind of a private cloud hosted solution, or we go to our 6 internal core data centers. So it's hugely part of our strategy, and it's all what she was talking about with infrastructure as a service, largely.
No, I just want to step back. I know we're not doing a data center consolidation panel. That's probably next week or a couple weeks from now. But when you talk about moving either to those data centers or to a private cloud, are you also looking at commercial cloud? I heard this great discussion the other day about commercial versus public. It's not really a public cloud. It's a commercial cloud. Really, they're almost all public. They're almost all private clouds, but in a commercial setup.
That's exactly right. Yes. So just because of what we do in the federal government and the sensitivity maybe of some of our data and just all the requirements we have around it, we have to make a decision whether we can go to a public cloud or go to a private cloud where we can have certain security parameters around that environment that will meet certain requirements that we have.
I just want to put a time check here, because it only took about 5 minutes until security came up. I brought it up. So that may be a record of how quick it came up. And we're going to talk about security probably a little later. Susie, let me turn back to you for a second about this idea of public cloud versus commercial cloud versus agency-hosted cloud. Are you starting to see agencies more comfortable with that commercial cloud concept? I imagine Microsoft has a government-only cloud.
We do. We actually are. And I think what we're seeing is people are starting to get a little bit more comfortable with logical versus physical separation of data, and they're looking at it at all layers of the stack. So from the network to the physical servers themselves, all the way up to where the data is stored in the actual applications that are being hosted there. And I think what's happening is people are starting to realize that you can actually secure these systems now logically versus what we used to consider the only way to do things in the federal government, which was to physically isolate it and put it in our data center behind our guards and our gates and our guns. And so, and that is the promise of cloud, is actually being able to go the logical versus physical isolation. That's what gives you the economies of scale and helps you actually save, is where all the cost savings is.
Sylvia, are you doing something to get rid of that hug the server culture?
We're trying. So at one point in time, I think we had 10,000 servers at the Department of the Interior, maybe more than that, and in a population of maybe 70,000. So we were like, gee, there's one server for every 8 people. We're like, that doesn't make any sense. So we're definitely trying to move the culture away from the fact that I need to be able to see the box, that kind of thing, or the boxes.
Is one reason why the culture change can happen now is because of mobility. People are more comfortable, for instance, if you have your Windows phone and you want to go to your email, whether it's a Yahoo or another account, is that something that's why people are more comfortable? Susie, pick that up.
Well, I definitely think people are more used to it now. I mean, and I think the blurring, like we've said for years now, of work and life, right, and your home life has absolutely occurred. Right? It used to be the day where people would carry around 2 and 3 phones, right, in the federal government. That really doesn't exist anymore for the most. I think there are some agencies that still do it, right?
I have 2 phones too.
Yeah. But I mean, for the most part, what's happening, I think, is the vendors, right, the mobile manufacturers, the mobile device management software providers that are out there, and the cloud providers have all started to get actually have the devices and the software be more intelligent about how they manage that data and how they do the logical versus physical isolation. And so I think what you're seeing now is people get more comfortable just with that fact alone and trying to apply that to what they do across the board. So when they start to put data in the cloud, they're like, well, if I can do it on this device, right, or if I can do these types of things at home, why can't I do them at work?
I also think, to add to what Susie's saying, is that it's also about how easy and cheap it is to get what you need. The easier and cheaper you make it to get that person what they need using cloud, the more propensity they'll have to consider it.
Because I think one thing that stands in the way, we can talk a lot about security, and as I said, we will, but it's really is that change of culture to understand that just because you can't see your server that's downstairs in your basement. Again, an interesting conversation I had just recently about what's better use of a basement, to have a bunch of boxes or put a gym there for your employees. And what I'm hearing is people are saying, we'd much rather have a gym than all these data centers. So I think that is starting to happen. I want to talk about the pressure, though, that's coming from this jump into mobile, this evolution, this revolution. Are you seeing different pressures? And I'll start with Sylvia, from employees versus the citizens you serve versus businesses that maybe contract with you that you also serve, or are the pressures all the same?
Well, I think that just generally in the marketplace and the life we live in day to day is that the expectation changed once kind of mobile devices just kind of exploded, right? The smartphone era, the tablets, all that kind of stuff. Now it's about things that are really close to a tablet replacing your laptop. I think that whole environment has just created a different expectation because it happened to us as consumers, just as regular citizens out in the world doing our business. When you come back into work, people are like, well, it's easy for me to do this. Why can't I do this at work? And then when you talk about the citizen engagement, I mean, they're using their smartphones or tablets to get whatever they need to do, whatever they want to do with us even, right? So the expectation on the citizens' side is basically, I want to be mobile, so I expect my government to enable me to do that.
I'm going to throw you just a little bit of a softball, so if you can't hit it, don't worry. When you guys developed recreation.gov a number of years ago, one of my favorite sites of that back in the good old days of e-government initiatives, are you seeing a change for how people are accessing recreation.gov, and does that change the way you guys look at it? Again, I know it's not necessarily in your window of expertise, but... Well,
let me tell you actually about something I think that's really exciting. It's kind of a new thing that's going on. We're just getting it started, and it's related to recreation.gov, and it's something that we call My America, and it was actually an idea that came out of OMB through Todd Park and some people at the Department of the Interior. It's this idea of, we have a ton of data at the Department of the Interior that has to do with all of the places where we're situated, whether it's a national park or refuges, fish and wildlife refuges, or even science centers. We have like over 2,000 physical locations throughout the country. this idea of My America is to allow us to expose that data that we have in a usable format that then private companies can come and then use and build mobility applications out of them. So that you can take information from the parks that we have about maybe campsites and stuff like that, and somebody who's out there, in private sector space, who is in Travelocity or AAA or whatever, who has an interest in taking that data and making it useful to their customers. We're trying to open that up so they actually have the freedom to do that. So
I got to ask, because my news hat comes on right now, big deal. Timing? Soon?
Well, so let me just say that we just hired a presidential innovation fellow who is working with our geospatial information officer and our CTO in working this through. So
more to come.
See. More to come.
All right, something to check back with
Yes.
you. Now I have something to ask you more about. Susie, I'm going to turn over to you because the same kind of question, pressures that you're seeing in the federal market, whether it's agencies coming to you and saying, our citizens are demanding this, or our contractors, which of course, you wear two hats there. You're a contractor, but also you have to meet other contractors' needs. And then you also have just employees who demand it. Are you seeing a pressure, different pressures, same pressures?
I think we are. I think, what we're actually seeing is kind of a redefinition of the term mobility. Mobility used to mean you have a device and you're doing, a few things on that device, usually getting mail or maybe texting. Now, really, it's all about the experience that's being delivered to the device. It's about the applications and the data the applications are delivering. And if you look at kind of the intersection of cloud, the cloud really now has kind of morphed a little bit too, and it's all about being able to deliver data, right, to those experiences on any device, anytime, anywhere, right, for anybody. And so if you look at the intersection of those two, I think now what we're seeing is people starting to realize, wow, I have these tools in my toolbox that can quickly enable me to get the data that I need, right, to the citizens that I serve in my, to complete my mission, and I can do it at a much lower price point than I can. And then you have to layer on the security piece. And I think that's where we're starting to see a lot of effort on the point of agencies today, where they're actually looking at, how do I look at this differently? I looked at security in the past this way. Now I'm going to the cloud. It's all about software automation. Right? How do I make sure that data is secure, that the devices that these individuals are using, whether they're employees, in the case of, an employee wanting to get access maybe to critical information they need to do their job when they're on the road or they're working from home, or whether it's a citizen and they need to get them information very quickly, whether it be an alert or an emergency situation.
All right, we're going to take a quick break. You're listening to the panel discussion, Government Perspectives on Mobility in the Cloud, sponsored by Microsoft on Federal News Radio 1500 AM and federalnewsradio.com.